Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 13th discussion of Cormac McCarthy's novel, No Country for Old Men. Just a reminder, please not to distribute any of these materials, and I hope that we can take a look at these 12 minutes of the film before we carry on with our discussion of these passages in the novel. I'll pause here to make sure you've seen it, and then I'll come back assuming that you've seen it. Okay, at this point in the novel, Moss has made his way back into the States. He gets some clothes, and he contacts Carla Jean, and he asks her to meet him at the Desert Sands in El Paso. Now, so he's back in the States. Now, at this point, meanwhile, Chigurh has returned to the Matacumbe Petroleum Group's executive offices, and he comes back and he kills the executive who hired Carson Wells to interfere with the original job that Chigurh's been hired to do. And after he kills the man, there's a witness in the office, and he says to the witness, "The reason I used birdshot was that I didn't want to break the glass behind you, to rain the glass on the people in the street." This is on page 200 near the top. The meaning is that Chigurh believes that those who make the wrong choices in life end up with violent fates. The people in the street haven't necessarily made any of these wrong choices. They're not really involved with Chigurh. At this moment, he has no interest in killing them. When the Matacumbe executive here, who is decided to hire Carson Wells, he made the wrong decision, and he's now dead. So according to Chigurh, this has nothing to do with him. This is just the decision that the executive made. So he carries no guilt. And this is just another example in the novel where it's trying to demonstrate that Chigurh lives by his extreme philosophy. You know, he doesn't just talk the talk, he also walks the walk, as they say. Now, I want to move on to an important element of the novel that's not in the film, and that's Moss's interaction with the young hitchhiker. This is pages 211 to 214 and 219 to 236. Okay, so as you know, in the novel, Moss picks up the hitchhiker girl. She's a 15-year-old runaway. He gives her money, he buys her food, he ignores her implied sexual advances. Ultimately, he's kind to her. He's a good man. And he ends up giving his life to try and save her. But before he does that, he tries to educate her and give her some wisdom that he's gained as an older person. He says, 3 weeks ago, I was a law-abiding citizen working a 9-to-5 job, 8 to 4 anyways. Things happen to you, they happen, they don't ask first, they don't require your permission. So he's starting to talk to this young girl, and what we find out, you know, Moss really can't control the world around him, but he can make strong moral decisions. He ends up being shot trying to save this young hitchhiker by the Mexican cartels, and Bell goes to investigate what happened, and he's talking to a translator who's translating for a witness to this murder. Bell says, "What does this man say?" He says the Mexican started it, says he drugged a woman out of a room, and the other man came out with a gun, but when he seen the Mexican had a gun pointed at the woman's head, he laid his piece down. Whenever he done that, the Mexican shoved the woman away and shot her, and then turned and shot him. He was standing in front of 117, right yonder. Shot him with the goddamn machine gun. According to this witness, the old boy fell down the steps, and then he picked up his gun again and shot the Mexican, which I don't see how he done it. He was shot all to pieces. You can see the blood on the walkway yonder. So in the novel, Moss lays down his gun to save this young hitchhiker. It's a personal decision, and he deliberately relinquishes control of the situation to save this girl. And what happens? This cartel member takes advantage of his humanity. So McCarthy gives Moss this choice at this extreme moment. He makes a moral choice that matters. He does the right thing. He has free will. He takes moral responsibility and tries to save this young person. This is something that Moss tried to say to the hitchhiker earlier. When he was talking about her running away, he says, the point is there ain't no point. He looked at her. After a while, he said, it's not about knowing where you are. It's about thinking you got there without taking anything with you. Your notion's about starting over. Anybody's. You don't start over. That's what it's about. And every step you take is forever. You can't make it go away. None of it. You understand what I'm saying? I know you don't, but let me try one more time. You think when you wake up in the morning, yesterday don't count, but yesterday is all that does count. What else is there? Your life is made up of the days it's made out of. Nothing else. You might think you could run away and change your name, and I don't know what all. Start over. And one morning you wake up and you look at the ceiling, and guess who's laying there? So he's saying the choices we make determine our lives, but which in some ways mirrors what Chigurh says, this idea of predeterminism. But the difference is, he has moral responsibility. He has empathy and compassion for other human beings. He's trying to educate this young person. You know, he ignores her sexual advances. He gives her money to help her. He puts his gun down so that she's safe. You know, he makes, at the moment of his death, he does what some people would say the right thing. In the film, it's very different. He simply dies because he's outgunned. In the film, the hitchhiker girl doesn't even exist. And this is a fundamental difference between the film and the novel. In the novel, Moss's kindness towards her is not in the film. His willingness to sacrifice himself for her, it's not in the film. His ultimately being faithful to Carla Jean when he has the opportunity to cheat on her, it's not in the film. So the ultimate meaning is McCarthy potentially believes that we need to make the right moral choices. We need heroism to save ourselves. You know, the film indicates that the universe is more governed by determinism. You know, Moss decided to take the money at the beginning of the story. He ends up with cartels dead. There's a certain amount of determinism in the world, obviously, based on choices we make, but the novel seems to be saying it's important to maintain the struggle for decency and compassion and heroism. Whereas in the film, the last time we see Moss alive is here, this picture where he's smiling at the woman by the pool who's invited him in for beer. And, you know, he says, I know what beer leads to. In other words, beer leads to sex. And the film sort of cuts away with him smiling like this. The implication is that he might accept her invitation. And the result is that the Mexicans will find him and kill him. In other words, the minute he steps off that moral path of righteousness and goodness and decency, he ends up dead. So Moss is killed by the Mexican cartel, and then Bell arrives, of course, too late to save him. And this is another sign that he's really not competent enough to do his job. In the film, then, Carla Jean arrives home to discover that Moss is dead at the hands of Chigurh. This is right after her, the death of her mother's funeral. And it's interesting in the novel, before Carla Jean's killed by Chigurh here, in the novel, Bell is recalling the last few times he spoke with Carla Jean after he informed her of Moss's death. He says, I had to take her at her word. Not a lot you could do. I never saw her again. I wanted to tell her that the way they had it in the papers wasn't right about him and that girl. Turned out she was a runaway, 15 years old. I don't believe he had anything to do with her, and I hated that she thought that. Called her a number of times, but she hung up on me, and I can't blame her. Then when they called me from Odessa and told me what had happened, I could not even believe it. It doesn't make no sense. Bell is still full of compassion. He doesn't want Carla Jean to think that Moss ran off with a young hitchhiker and cheated on her before he died. Now that's very important because that's in stark contrast to what Chigurh does to Carla Jean before he kills her. You remember in the film, Chigurh tells her, look, your husband had the choice to save you, and he chose not to. But let's step back to Bell for a moment. In the film, there's two conversations from the novel that are melded into one. He's sitting talking with Sheriff Roscoe. The two conversations in the novel are from pages 192 to 194 and 236 to 242, I think. Both conversations are about how ill-equipped law enforcement is to deal with people like Chigurh. Here, you can see a picture of Roscoe, and you remember in the film he says, this is a goddamn homicidal lunatic. Yeah, I don't think he's a lunatic, though. Well, what would you call him? I don't know. Very important. I don't know. Bell doesn't know what he's up against. Chigurh is so good at sort of being this enigmatic entity. And then when Roscoe asks what Chigurh, they don't know his name at this point or his face or anything, might have gone, again, Bell responds, I don't know. like they're at an utter loss. They can't catch up with this guy. And then they discuss this this drug trade, and Roscoe says, well, the book says the sheriff shook his head. Dope, he said. Dope. They sell that shit to school kids. It's worse than that. How's that? School kids buy it. And then later, they know that this is a massive industry, and they, how do you stop something like this? And then they get to talking about the murder of Moss, and Sheriff Roscoe says to Bell, well, Sheriff said there ain't nothing you could have done about it. No, Bell said, which I always like to think there is. So you got a couple of old timers here. They sound very old-fashioned, conservative types, maybe a little out of date, but they do make some sense what they're saying. Roscoe says it's all the goddamn money and the drugs. What's it all leading to? It's the tide. It's the dismal tide. It's not the one thing. Who do such a thing? How do you defend against it? Very important. There's this massive wave of violence, this dismal tide, like a tidal wave. And how do you defend against that? It has to be done at an individual level, but it's very hard to do, especially when things like cartels have so much power over not just customers, but over law enforcement itself. I mean, down in that Texas-Mexico border area, at least in the 1980s, if you're a law enforcement officer and you go up against the cartels, they'll just take your family out and torture them to death, and then they'll do it to you. So Bell's had a bit of a loss. Later on in the novel, he's reading a newspaper in a cafeteria. He's with a waitress. And says, when the waitress came with the more coffee, he asked her what kind they got. The evening paper. I don't know, she said. I quit reading it. I don't blame you. What if I could? I quit reading it, and I made my husband quit reading it. Is that right? I don't know why they call it a newspaper. I don't call that stuff news. No. When was the last time you read something about Jesus Christ in the newspaper? Bell shook his head. I don't know. He said, I guess I'd have to say it'd be a while. Goes back to the title of the novel, No Country for Old Men. As we get older and more frail, more afraid, it gets more and more tempting to sort of bury your head in the sand and ignore the news. You just become numb to it. There's just so much violence out there. And this is something that Bell himself says, if I could stop reading it, I would. So I'll just ask you to please watch that clip again in the film, and we'll carry on next time with continuation. Thank you.